All right, so yesterday, as we were going off the air, we were actually expecting that NCAA committee to vote at 3 o'clock Central. That's when they were convening. It took more than 2 hours of discussion to finally get to a vote and have the announcement come out, which is that the NCAA did grant blanket eligibility relief. So just as a very quick catch-up, and I'm going to try not to get too deep in the weeds, but I know what a lot of people have asked as it pertains to this topic. So I'm going to try to check the boxes sort of as we go, and if I leave anything off or you got a question, hit us up on Twitter, at Matt Moscona, at 1045 ESPN. Of course, you can jump in the Bayou Ford Huddle. We're on Facebook Live as well, so if you want to watch us on Facebook, you can certainly do that as well on the 1045 ESPN Facebook page with the studio cam, so you can kind of see behind the scenes and in the breaks and all that stuff as well. So feel free to jump aboard there. Blanket eligibility, the question initially was, would the eligibility be only for seniors? That was kind of the discussion early. We had a really good feeling like seniors were going to get their year back in spring sports. But what about that freshman, sophomore, and underclassman? If you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, you still lost a year of eligibility. You lost a year to compete. If you're a sophomore baseball player, you just lost a year. You got 5 to play for, and you just lost one of them to no fault of your own. The easiest thing to do for the NCAA would have been to just grant seniors that eligibility relief. Because if you had only granted seniors eligibility relief, this would all be over 1 year from now. When this current group of seniors, they could all elect to come back if they wanted to, play one more year if they wanted to, if the university wanted to fund that scholarship, and then it's over. But in granting eligibility relief for everybody, what you've done now is guarantee that these questions, these roster issues, these financial decisions will persist for another 4 years at least. Because the freshman who came in and lost his freshman year or her freshman year just got that year back. Here's the other interesting part. And this is what's going to be, this for me is going to be as we move through this. And by the way, the NCAA deserves credit for that. They do. They deserve credit because it would have the path of least resistance would have been give seniors an extra year, let them stay at their current scholarship level, and after that's done, we're over it. The right thing to do is what they did, which is give everybody that year. Now, that's complicated, and we'll work through some of those complicating factors. So, first and foremost, I think the biggest question is, and the important note is for this year, when seniors return, roster limits and scholarship limits for all intents and purposes don't exist. Now you've got, let's take baseball for example, because I think that's the one that everyone here in this audience is going to be most interested in. So just so you know, when we talk about the spring sports are baseball, beach volleyball, golf, lacrosse, rowing, softball, tennis, outdoor track and field, men's volleyball, and women's water polo. Those are the NCAA sanctioned spring sports. So as it relates, basketball, for those that are asking, is classified as a winter sport. So basketball is not going to get another year. But for the purposes here of our audience that's most interested, it probably is going to be baseball and what happens there. So next year, typically baseball has a 35-man roster. You've got 11.7 scholarships that have to be divvied out over 27 members of your 35-man roster. Next season, there just isn't a roster limit. You'll have the 11.7 for your 35 and your 27 on scholarship, but the seniors that elect to come back do not count against that 35-man roster or 11.7. So if you're a squad that had 7 seniors, you're going to have 42 guys on your baseball team next year. So you're going to have imbalanced rosters in college baseball next season. But the reason that it's good that those guys don't count against the roster is because if you would have the way the system is set up, you're going to have natural attrition. Guys are going to graduate. Guys are going to leave early for the draft. And then you have the next group of recruits coming in to take their spot. Well, when one cog in that wheel stops, there's a logjam somewhere, right? And so if the seniors who had elected to come back would have counted against the 35-man roster, the freshmen coming in wouldn't have had a spot. So then the baseball coaches would have had to decide, well, do I let the senior come back? Do I tell that incoming freshman, sorry, I don't have a spot for you? Do you tell a guy already on the roster who maybe isn't playing a ton, hey, you don't have a spot? I mean, those are tough decisions that are made every year, but it would have been compounded even further with this. So the NCAA said, you know what? Forget about roster limits. Forget about the scholarship limit. Like, the seniors will not count toward that. So that's a good thing. The question is, what about next year? And the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. For the next 4 years, is that the case? Or are you expected after the 2021 baseball season to figure all of that out? And for every other sport as well. Are you expected to just figure all that out? And give yourself a year to make it work for your roster. Because the other thing that's going to get complicated this year, as we've talked about a bunch specifically with baseball, is with a shortened draft, you're going to have guys that otherwise would have been drafted prospects that aren't going to leave. And so you're still going to have you're going to have roster instability and some really difficult decisions that coaches are going to have to make. But the fact that the seniors will not count against the roster limit next year, that's super significant. A couple of other things that people have asked, and I would highly recommend, if you've not done so yet, if you're interested from the baseball side of things. Kendall Rogers, D1 Baseball, has an awesome piece up right now at D1 Baseball explaining the whole thing as it pertains to baseball. So you can go to Kendall's Twitter, at Kendall Rogers, or you can go to d1baseball.com. So a couple of other things that people have asked. A lot of people have asked, what about junior college players? So something to remember is that the junior college players are not under NCAA jurisdiction. There is a NJCAA, the National Junior College Athletic Association. So the NCAA has given eligibility relief. The NJCAA has also given spring athletes their year back with no waiver required. But what about players transferring from junior college into the NCAA, from the NJCAA into the NCAA? That's the bigger question. So that is in Kendall Rogers' piece. And a couple of important notes that he points out. He said, this is from Chris Parker, President and CEO of the NJCAA. I'll just read straight from Kendall's Twitter here so you know, and then I'll sort of explain it. He said, any waiver requested to the NJCAA from a Division I institution to get a player a year of eligibility back will be immediately approved. So if someone is going from Division I to the NJCAA, then that player will get their eligibility back. So in essence, junior college players keep that year of eligibility. That's good. The more interesting question is how it goes the other way. If a junior college player is going into Division I, the way that I read it is they would not maintain that year of eligibility, but could apply for a waiver to get that year back. And if that's approved, then they would maintain that year of eligibility. I hope that makes sense. But essentially, it would have to be a waiver process for anyone going from junior college to Division I to maintain that year of eligibility. So if you lost your sophomore year in junior college and you're transferring to LSU, if you want to be a sophomore at LSU, then you've got to apply for a waiver and have that granted, essentially is how that goes. The other thing that I found very interesting, this was go see Kendall Rogers' Twitter. He's got all this there, and it's very informative. He wrote that the NCAA Division I Council acknowledged that college baseball's roster management situation will require further discussion in the future. So coaches worried about rosters in 2021 and beyond, the council will be looking into this, potentially making changes. That's what I referred to, right? So the question that persists is, and you can see why this is sticky, right? Because if they had just granted eligibility relief for seniors, then you grant those seniors that extra year in 2021 if they're back. You have expanded rosters, expanded scholarships, and then after that, you're reset. But because everyone gets eligibility, well, what happens in 2022 and 23 and 24 when the freshman now is a senior but wants that extra year? Are you still at 11.7, or does he count over the 11.7 in addition to the 11.7, right? That's what they'll decide in the future. The casualties involved here are going to be at programs where the athletic departments can't afford to fund additional scholarships. This likely won't be the place at the circumstance at places like LSU or other Power 5 schools, Autonomy 5 schools. If LSU needs to fund an extra 50 scholarships, or if Southern Cal or Tennessee or Penn State need to fund an extra 50 scholarships, they can do it. If they have seniors that want to return, they can do it. The really difficult thing is going to be for the group of 5 and athletic departments with a smaller budget when your revenue is decreasing and now all of a sudden you're going to have an increased expense on the scholarship side of things. If you have a senior that wants to come back, can you afford to have them come back? If you've budgeted for 11.7 scholarships in baseball and now all of a sudden you're going to have 15, 17 scholarships in baseball, can you afford that? And some athletic departments, the answer is probably going to be no. And so what do? The NCAA did allow for those players to come back at the same aid or no aid, really anything in between. So that's going to be the casualty, and the unfortunate casualty in this is that at smaller institutions, some athletic departments, amid the budget, the decreased budget because of all that's happened, they're not going to be able to afford to fund all these scholarships. And so that's going to be a casualty that we're going to have to watch as this all unfolds. But in the immediate short term, the great news is that the seniors who lost this year, they're back next year if they want to be, and not counting against the roster. It was the decision that was going to bring the most complications, but it was also the right decision, and the NCAA did the right thing. So I'll applaud them for that.